He said at the beginning, I've made every single mistake in the book. That is like the most fundamental way to learn, right? And to take risks and to feel uncomfortable. Like I said towards the beginning of the conversation, if you never take a risk, if you never feel uncomfortable, you don't know what you're capable of. In the US, they've coined it choke point 2.0, where crypto companies couldn't gain access to the banking system, and therefore it was like robbing them of oxygen. They just suffocated. That innovation wasn't able to develop. Now Trump comes in as crypto friendly and has put in leaders that are supportive of crypto, and that's why it's just taking off like crazy. The amount of investment and the number of companies that are now expanding and growing in crypto is just incredible. I even lied through my teeth. I mean, I was literally homeless at the time.
After college, Gene lived in his car for 6 months, made all the mistakes in the book, but ended up as chief risk officer for Revolut US, one of world's fastest growing fintechs. Today, he works less and earns more and lives in Lisbon on his own term. Now, Gene reveals how we built a successful freelance career from scratch, used his network to land top-tier clients, and why there's more demand on compliance expertise right now, especially with the rise of crypto in the global market economy, everything around it, because crypto is a really broad topic.
And it's really taking off. It's really hot at the moment.
Yeah, it really is, because, I'm going to beat C Prague in tomorrow. And then need to do some deep research on that. And then you see like Bitcoin on its own. It's like a whole philosophy. Like people see it as a way of life. And it's like, I don't know, it's really crazy if you dive a bit deep into that rabbit hole.
Super interesting. And let me know if there's anything I can help with your research there. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
Because funny thing is, we matched during a run club in Lisbon. And you're also one of the captains, right?
I am, yes. The Founders Running Club.
Founders Run Club in Lisbon. Really check it out. It's really good to meet people. And at some point, we were sitting at quite a high pace there running. we were like asking you all kinds of questions about your story. We were like out of breath, talking. And made the 5K became a 7K or 7.5.
That's right.
And then it was, oh, wait, should we do it on a podcast instead of during a run?
This is a lot easier than running at a 6-minute pace or whatever we were running at.
Yeah. And now I'm curious though, because you're a remote freelancer now, you're a remote worker. You had a lot of a career behind you. What is your day-to-day? What does it look like right now compared to what it was and everything that you left behind?
Yeah, great question, Joe. So I moved to Lisbon about a year ago, and I kept my U.S. clients. So I'm still working on U.S. hours, roughly speaking. But now that I'm freelancing, I have my own consulting firm, and I'm advising crypto companies and fintechs. It's been really nice because what my day looks like is I get up, get my kids ready for school. We go to school, do a drop off. Sometimes I'll even run back home through the Monsanto, which is just over the hill there. So beautiful trail run through Lisbon's largest park, and it's completely green. And then sometimes I work out here in this building. We're in the Infinity Tower, and we're just talking about how there's a couple pools, one on the roof, one in the basement, and a gym. So it's really nice to be able to work out, take care of myself. My wife was taking morning Portuguese classes, but now we have some time. So after I get over this hump of work, we're going to spend a little bit more time touring the city and so forth. And then in the afternoon and evenings, because I work US time, is when I usually spend time with my clients and get work done there. But I only work maybe 10 or 20 hours a week. So that, compared to my life in the US before I was consulting, I usually work upwards of 80 hours or more a week, and on a pretty consistent basis. Now I have 3 young kids, so it's been really nice to find that balance here in Portugal. I think part of it is cultural, part of it's location, and probably most of it is my current setup.
And especially because we've talked a bit about that when we're on the run. When you work for a fintech like Revolut, I mean, it's one of the fastest growing. I even have Revolut right now. Like, it's one of the fastest growing startups. Like, how is that difference from going out of that fast paced world to now being maybe a bit more grounded?
Yeah, great question. I really view it as phases. You know, I think um, you started the podcast off with the tagline of how can you become a feel if you're stuck in a stressed environment or you don't have the confidence to go it alone. How can you get there? And I view that kind of as a byproduct of really putting the time to become an expert or professional in your field. Before I started my own consultancy. I was in risk management for close to 25 years, and I put in a lot of hours, a lot of hard work to get there. And I don't think I would be where I am today without putting in that hard work. And it wasn't a means to an end or anything like that. I think if you're going to spend, 80 hours a week or 60 hours a week working at something, it better be something that you're interested in and enjoy. And I think with that passion, you can become an expert in your field, and I try to keep that sharp with my clients and learning from them as well.
Because how was that transition when it comes to coming from a corporate title to now having your own company? Like, was that immediate trust for your clients? Was that like, what was the biggest thing that you needed to figure out when you made that switch?
It's a really good question because I didn't have a lot of confidence when I first dipped my toe into consulting because it was new and I wasn't sure if I could deliver. And I think it's a good thing actually to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation because the fact is if you never challenge yourself, if you never feel uncomfortable, you never know what you're capable of. So I think that's number one. But I think number two is I've been very deliberate with my clients, especially if there's something where it's a little bit, I still have the base of my expertise that I can rely on, but maybe there's some things that I need to deliver to the client that I haven't done before and it's the first time. So I always work very closely with my clients to be number one upfront and say that. But number two, I I take it as a philosophy of as long as I can deliver value to the client, then it's a good relationship, right? So there's many things that I do to test that out. Sometimes I'll allow the client, I'll just deliver something on a trial basis, and if they're satisfied with it, then we forge a relationship and formalize it, and then go forward from there. But I find that that strategy works really well because it shows that you're not just trying to make money off of a client, which is not, that's part of it, but it's not all of it for me. The main thing and the primary thing should always be delivering value to the client.
And then you said one really interesting thing in between, and that's you may not always do things that you think you're capable of. So what are things that you discovered by just doing it and just by going all into your consulting after quitting with Revolut, that you now find out that you're capable of, that you didn't thought you were capable of before?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is there's always no one's an expert in everything. It's just reality, right? So, but your clients sometimes need help in areas that you're not familiar with. So the question is, can you get can you get up to speed quick enough at a level of competency where you can help them better than they can help themselves? And I think one important key to that has been leveraging my network. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit more. But I spent a lot of time building a pretty extensive network of compliance professionals in the Bay Area where I came from San Francisco. And I can tell the story a little bit later on, but I found that that has been really critical for me to be able to close those gaps in my own knowledge or lack of knowledge in specific areas and to help my clients out that way.
So what do you do then specifically to move at that fast pace to close up those gaps?
Well, it's really good. I think some things have really helped me in my past to be able to do that. Number one, I was very deliberate and conscious in choosing the school that I went to. It's called Swarthmore College. You probably haven't heard of it because it's a tiny school near Philadelphia that's a liberal arts school. And their mantra is really learning how to learn. And I made a deliberate decision to go there, number one, because I come from a small fishing village in Alaska. So I didn't want to go to like a huge university where I'd be overwhelmed and just be lost in the sea of students. But number two, the teachers and the culture of the institution is such that you really learn to learn very quickly. So I thought that was a really good decision in the past that I made in order to invest in my education that way.
Learn to learn. Can you dive a bit deeper in that? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so great example. I'll never forget, I really wanted to take constitutional law at Swarthmore as a freshman. And normally it was only allowed for, I think, sophomores or juniors and up. My dad was an attorney, so I already had an interest in the law. And I made my case to the professor, and she allowed me into her class, even though I was a freshman. But what's really interesting about that class is that the reading assignments are such that there's no possible way anyone can read all the reading assignments. And so what you learn very quickly is to prioritize and take an impossible task and figure out what's the minimum, almost the minimum viable product, right? What is the minimum amount of effort or minimal or the most effort that you could take to get the maximum output? And that was a very great lesson for me early on in my college days.
And because of that you learned how to learn and learn to identify how to take the minimum amount of effort to get the maximum results, it's the same principle that you apply right now to fill up the gaps, to learn quicker and move at a faster pace. So to do the things that are most necessary to do. But how do you choose those battles?
How do you choose what to prioritize?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of different ways to tackle it. I think one is looking at what is the end goal, what is the end vision, and work backwards from there. Another way of looking at it is the other way around, where you're looking to build things up. So what are the components that you need to understand with a degree of competency in order to be able to build things up to that end goal? I think depending on the problem set, sometimes one is more appropriate than the other.
So, and then you'll learn by trial and error which one to apply best, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another important thing is, for me, and you said at the beginning, I've made every single mistake in the book. That is like the most fundamental way to learn, right? And to take risks and to feel uncomfortable, because like I said towards the beginning of the conversation, if you never take a risk, if you never feel uncomfortable, you don't know what you're capable of, but you're probably also not growing because you're not making mistakes, and mistakes are a very important and a fast way to learn.
And that's how you become a risk officer at a place like Revolut, because then that's all you do, like analyzing what risks to take and what not.
Exactly.
So it's kind of your expertise to know specifically that, because now you're into compliance. Like, can you explain what compliance means? Because I think it's a corporate term that everyone who is not in a corporate environment does not know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the highest level, compliance is the discipline of complying with laws and regulations, right? And within the industry that I work with, and whether it's, fintech or financial services or crypto, crypto, the regulations are starting to come in. Certainly here in Europe, it's already here. It's fairly rigorous in terms of the regulations that exist. But for banks or fintechs, it's pretty rigorous in the US. It's a very complex system. There's 3 bank regulators, believe it or not: the Fed, the FDIC, and the OCC. And then there used to be a fourth not too long ago, the Office of the Thrift. But anyways, it's for that reason that it's so fundamental in financial services and in fintech, because you almost can't get started without having being able to comply with the laws and regs.
Okay, and if we wouldn't define the word comply, so a 5-year-old would understand it, how would you define it?
Yeah, so the way I would define it is if there's a set of laws and regulations, with those come a set of requirements based off of the activity that you want to do, whether it's extending the loan, whether it's making payments, whether it's, issuing a credit card or a debit card. And compliance is about meeting those requirements.
So make sure everything within the paperwork, the contracts, the legal terms is in order so you can move forward.
Exactly. And I think it goes beyond legal agreements and contracts. The reason why these laws and regulations exist in most countries is because they're trying to protect the consumer. There's many different ways that consumers can be harmed by companies that are offering new financial products, right? In countries maybe that aren't as well regulated, the companies make all kinds of claims that are untrue or false, and then consumers get looped into it, and before you know it, maybe they're losing money, or they've lost the ability to hold on to their home, or these bad things happen. And that's exactly why the laws and regulations are there, to protect everyday consumers.
And that's why compliance is there. So it goes to deeper level of protecting the one who buys in whatever sense it means. So it could be a credit card, debit card, but also could be a home. And really interesting U-turn. I was listening to the Diary of a CEO with an older guy who was the godfather of AI. I forgot his name. And there they talked about ChatGPT and AI and how that slowly starts to become more regulated, as well as and I saw in your LinkedIn that you're also involved in an AI company.
That's right.
How does that work on the compliance side? Like, that's a really broad U-turn, but how do you manage that? Because it's so new and it's so out there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually advise a few fintech companies or regtech companies in that space. And I think there's a couple aspects to it. Number one is, ChatGPT or Perplexity or these AI models are good general models. But if you want to create AI tools for compliance, then you need to fine tune them. And what that means is to tailor them for a specific use case. And so for one of the first AI companies that I work with, I actually helped them create some of the training data so that they could fine tune their model. And now that model actually works very well. So if you were to take the same use case and put it in ChatGPT, it wouldn't actually be anywhere near as strong as how they fine tune their own proprietary model.
And then there's like that's one of the terms that you hear in Europe, at least if you're in an entrepreneurial environment, and that's that regulations hold back evolution, or regulations hold back how you say that, development, especially when it comes to AI, because then, for example, VO3 of Google came out in US, and only if you turn on a VPN, you can get it in Europe.
Which
VO3, the model of Gemini with the Google.
Oh, okay, mobile Gemini, yeah.
Yeah, model of Gemini that can generate insane quality of video. How do you regulate compliance in a way when it comes to AI, when it comes to innovation, that it's not holding back the innovation too much? Because I think that's a real challenge. And also when it comes to crypto, it's really new and it's really innovative, but regulations are also the thing that can hold that innovation back or slow it down. So how do you work with that without slowing it down, but with best interest for the consumer and the company?
That is an incredible question that we could spend an entire podcast on. But I think just to sum it up, or to attack it at a high level, I really observed this in the area of both fintech and crypto with the last presidential administration, with the Biden administration. And I think what was really interesting was the regulators or the people in those leadership positions. From my perspective, and this is my own observation, I could be totally off on this, is that they were a little bit scared about where things were going because they didn't have a level of control and they didn't have a level of understanding. So I think in absence of understanding and control, what happens? They try to control it even more, right? And that can be at the detriment of innovation. And so what I think happened in the last few years under the Biden administration, if I take fintech as an example, um, many of the fintechs partner with banks in order to leverage their licenses and be able to do the things that only banks can do in the US. And because there was such a strong arm and enforcement actions against many of those partner banks, fintechs weren't actually able to, it became very difficult to partner with them. And so there was an entire, what I call lost generation of fintech companies where there were founders with brilliant ideas that could be the next Chime that just IPO'd or the next Circle that IPO'd last week, I believe. But they were never even developed because of how strict the regulators had become. Same thing with crypto. In the US, they've coined it choke point 2.0, where crypto companies couldn't gain access to the banking system, and therefore it was like robbing them of oxygen. They just suffocated. And that innovation wasn't able to develop. Now Trump comes in as crypto friendly and has put in leaders that are supportive of crypto. And that's why it's just taking off like crazy. The amount of investment and number of companies that are now expanding and growing crypto is just incredible. And I think to some degree, the regulators were right. With some banks, they didn't have a good grasp of the risks that were growing within the industry. But I think they could have approached it differently, and particularly with the SEC in the area of crypto, they really, in my opinion, they put their heads in the sand, and that was
Yeah. Just pretend that it was not there. And I think also if you're around in the entrepreneurial space, you hear it in the conversations in the hallways, because since the beginning of this year, and since I'm now back in Lisbon or back in Europe again, I've never heard of Web3 before, for example. And I got the feeling that all of a sudden everyone is talking about building on Web3, using Web3 to implement in your business, how you can use Web3 to let people pay with crypto. And could that be a result of the regulations that are holding back maybe a bit? So the innovation within Web3 and all the innovations in general around crypto, AI, and everything is more what you hear in the hallways right now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's not a coincidence at all. I mean, I think Trump came through very crypto friendly. And one of the earlier questions that I didn't fully answer is how do you open things up, or how do you approach regulation when it becomes, too tight? And I think part of it is lobbying, but also I think part of it is having trade associations that are able to educate the lawmakers and the regulators about, we understand you're concerned about this. Here's how you can approach it. And the more you can educate them, the more that they feel comfortable with the space, the more they feel like they do have control, or that they can implement the right controls in order to play their role, which is a very critical part of the ecosystem.
That's really interesting, because then there's a lot of persuasion and technical word choosing, let's put it like that, in just applying compliance, because then it's almost a political game as well in the way you communicate with the people that you need to deal with.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what happened in the past year was the crypto companies got together, they lobbied. I think, Trump, good or bad, supported, had influence as a result of that, and therefore put people in positions in the regulatory space that were able to open things up in a controlled manner.
And then you said they lobbied, and now I'm gonna be like a full-on rookie here. if you lobby,
Hmm.
what can I imagine? What do you do? It's like, hey, I'm here, I have this idea, give me your money? Or like, how does that work? Because you definitely have more experience in that. And now I just discovered that it's also a game of persuasion. Well, that's a game I do know based on my sales experience. How does that work? So how do you frame the regulations? How do you frame the compliance in a way while lobbying to get investments into your company or to get people pulled into your company, your story, the thing that you're selling?
Yeah, absolutely. One concrete example is I used to work for a company called Prosper Marketplace. And what we did was we pulled together with several other companies that were in the similar space. We had similar problems. So, as an example, it's too detailed an example. So, let me just fast forward ahead. So, we pulled our resources to create a trade association. At that time, it was called the Marketplace Lending Association. And now they rebranded themselves, and the name escapes me, but it's a fintech trade association essentially. And what they were able to do was meet with members of Congress, the House, the Senate, the special finance committees, and say, "Here's an issue. Here's our proposed solution. We'd love we'd love for you to write a bill around this." And much of the source writing for that comes from the trade association, right? Um, and the goal of Congress is to be able to make good on their constituents' interests. And so, as long as it's not just these specific companies, but it's for the greater good, and in particular their constituents from their states, then you know if there's enough interest, they'll write a bill and it'll get passed.
Ah, that's interesting. So you set up a foundation. The foundation is in your favor because it's because of the compliance and the rules that you want to get through.
Mhm.
Then you frame it in a way, hey, this is the foundation we set up, but we believe your input is really valuable. And because the foundation you set up is quite solid, you give them some space for input. Because of the input they give, uh, it feels like they have control, and the chances and odds of the agreement pushing through are increased because you framed a core foundation and let them give their input to it, which immediately build trusts from a persuasive perspective. And in that way, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the one caveat I would say is that they're in the driver's seat. So it's not just about getting their input. They're they're the ones with the power to write laws and promulgate laws, right? So really we're beholden to them to take action and write new laws that support the overall agenda. But you're absolutely right. I think it's really about education, because what I found is more often than not, these congressmen aren't even aware that there's an issue. They're just, there's a million things going on and they're not close enough to it. So by having a half an hour meeting where you're able to educate them, and if there's enough interest around this across Congress, then they'll write a bill.
That's really, and then that's done based on the framework of like, okay, this is the foundation, give your interests around it. And because it's based on your interest, that a solid foundation, they write the bill with their sense of control. But in businesses, it's exactly the same because the one who pays is the one who is in power.
Exactly.
And if you frame a deal, I do this a lot with my clients, maybe a bit too much. So if they're watching, this is how you are persuaded. You just give them a foundation of deliverables. Then you ask, what would you like to be changed, or what would you like to be added to make it worth for you?
Right.
And then based on what they say it's worth to them, I go a bit above that or a bit underneath that. And in that way, they always agree because they had the sense of, or always 60 to 70% agree, and your odds increase because you give them the feeling of power by giving away your cards, but setting up a foundation, so your deliverables, um, that they agree on. So it's really interesting if you translate it directly to business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what it comes down to fundamentally is finding win-win win-win frameworks, right? So in these type of situations where you're educating lawmakers, the trade association wins and the companies that make up that trade association because they have an agenda that's helping their businesses. The lawmakers win because they look good with their constituents, and hopefully their constituents win as well. That is, it's not just good for the businesses, but it's good for their customers as well. So, I think if you have that circle where everyone is winning, the only thing that prevented that to begin with was either the idea or the solution to solve the problem, or awareness of the problem and the solution, and the willpower to make it happen.
And then I think that's the perfect bridge to go to the next question. Like, what's the biggest mistakes in crypto or in compliance or like adding compliance you see most startups make right now? Because we just discovered always go for a win-win solution by framing things in the right way, and always search for solutions by taking risks in the right way. And that fits your whole profile and your whole background. But what are then the biggest mistakes you see most startups, IPOs, whatsoever make?
For crypto companies in particular, I think crypto was born out of the 2008 financial crisis. I think after the financial crisis occurred, where there was, a mortgage crisis in the US, there was a lot of distrust in banks. And, I think that was to a degree warranted, right? And so crypto was born as being a decentralized financial system where, the old adage is you own your keys, you own your coins, right? Like you're in control. It's not at the bank. The bank doesn't own it. It's not subject to a reserve system where the banks are lending out the dollars that you give them and so forth. So I think with that came somewhat of, in my opinion, a little bit of an extreme, almost libertarian independence type philosophy where no one wanted anything to do with banks. They wanted to be completely independent of the regulators, the banks, the whole financial system, and create their own financial system, right? And I think that's partly why I mentioned that the regulators really felt like they were losing control, and that it was something that they didn't understand because of all the technical aspects of crypto and how it operates, right? And so I think that was a mistake to go so far to that extreme. I understand the sentiment, I understand the philosophy, but I think it's very difficult to be able to develop something in that environment when we live in a society that's ruled by laws and regulation, right? And I think a lot of crypto companies still to this day, not a lot, but some of them, there's a few of them that don't get the proper licenses and therefore don't comply with the laws and regs. And, that goes down some dark places.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in that way, the compliance or the compliance mistakes that most crypto companies or innovative companies, because now we talk about crypto, but I think it's the same within the AI frameworks. Like, yeah, that you hold those back, and now and think it comes to a lot of companies. That same principle that avoiding laws and regulations is something that will backfire you in the end. And that's where most startups or companies in that kind go wrong, because they just want to go and forget to register.
Yeah. I don't mean this this analogy isn't meaning to be demeaning to any companies or anything like that, but it's almost like going from being a teenager to an adult, right? In your teenage years, you want your freedom, you don't want to follow your parents' rules, and sometimes you go to an extreme in order to realize your freedom and experiment where those boundaries are and what bad things can happen and so forth. Then some bad things happen, and then you realize, oh, those my parents had a really good idea in terms of implementing those rules, or there's a reason behind them, and so forth, and so then they grow into adults, and so I think that's again, not to be demeaning to any companies. I don't think any companies are teenagers or anything like that, but it's just an analogy to help, you know, form why it's important to try to come up with a mature way where you can work with the parents, so to speak, or in this case, the regulators, to find out how do you have the innovation but do it safely.
Yeah. And that brings me back to a story of the steering wheel. The story of the steering wheel?
No, please.
The story of the steering wheel is like when cars are just invented,
Mm-hmm.
they did not have a steering wheel. They had two leather struts
Oh, interesting.
because they just came from riding a horse.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But so what you do, you build new technology based on your old foundation because that's what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, they say, hey, it's way better to have a steering wheel instead of having two leather straps in your car.
Yeah,
That makes sense. And I think that analogy or the story of the steering wheel is a bit of the teenage years of a company that you are describing. So yes, compliance is important. Yes, it is important to be regulated. But I think that experimentation phase, and to go back to your teenager analogy, is also the thing that lets you form a steering wheel instead of still steering with the leather strap. So I think regulating that in a win-win approach that is not holding back innovation is an art on itself.
absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. And if we, because this is a lot of in-depth knowledge that you just get thrown at, but that's not how it started. If we stop throwing like all this knowledge to the people here and do a throwback, we know that after college, it did not all went on roses and petals, how they said in a beautiful sentence. Because then you made all the mistakes in the book. You lived in your car for 6 months. That's what we thought of as well. Like, what was going on at that current moment that brought you into that place that you had to live in your car for 6 months? Because nothing comes at ease.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back. I praised my school, Swarthmore College, and I still think it was some of my best years. And I love that school to death. It's a really important institution to me. At the same time, it didn't really prepare me for the working world or what came after school, because it was a very academic place and very theoretical. I mean, the idea of learning to learn and so forth. It's an important skill, but it's necessary but not sufficient, right, to be able to flourish in the corporate world. So there was a lot I had to learn there. My first job out of school was working and I knew I wanted to get back to the West Coast, so I took some courses at UC Berkeley actually for the summer. That was my graduation gift, and I raided their career center and found a job at a strategic consulting firm. And after about 9 months or so, almost everyone quit because the working conditions were so poor, and there was just the company culture. There's complete lack of respect for people, that people took their bonuses and left. And I was so naive. I thought, okay, I'm going to work really hard, make up for all these people that left, and the company will look up to me and promote me and so forth. But it wasn't the case at all. They could not care less, and when I realized that I was putting in so many hours and working hard to be able to move up the corporate ladder, and that no one really cared because that was the company culture, and why everyone else had already left, I decided to quit, because here I put my heart and soul to be able to help this company when it had lost, more than 50% of their staff, and there was no gratitude, there was no acknowledgement, nothing. Um, and then I had a hard time finding my next job, and so I wasn't able to make rent payments eventually, and so I decided to, sleep on my friends' couches. And then when I wore out my welcome there, I was sleeping in my truck for about 6 months or so, and it was one of the most difficult times in my life. It was very, very difficult. Here I was graduating from a pretty prestigious school with nothing to show for it. I was living in my truck, and my parents were nice, and they reached out to some friends, and they had a pizza delivery business, and they offered me a job as a pizza delivery person. But I don't know if it was ego or more that I knew myself that I could do more than be a pizza delivery person. And so I was doing all kinds of temp work, and I was selling telephone lines, to teaching newly arrived immigrants English, to creating land networks for nonprofits, all kinds of stuff. And I finally got a temp job working for General Electric. And to make the long story short, I almost lost my job there because they wanted me to unify these project plans, and I automated it. And this is in the 90s, right? So, I mean, it's like pretty rudimentary technology. But then I realized when I automated, I was like, oh crap, I just worked myself out of a job. So I studied the project plans, and I realized that there was a big issue with their plan. They had to build this application that was to support this $500 million acquisition of insurance from this big insurance company called Travelers, and they didn't have enough time to build it. They went internally and asked their IT team if they could build it, and no one wanted the risk of not being able to deliver it on time. So they said, no, that's impossible. And then they went outside, and it was going to cost them $500,000. So I was only getting paid, I think, $20 an hour at the time. And because I was so scared of losing my job, I lied through my teeth, and I said, I will build this for what you're paying me now. And, there was, of course, no one believed me. They were like, yeah, whatever, go ahead, Gene. I mean, what was it going to cost them? $20 an hour, right? So they said, go ahead and try to build something. So I didn't even know how to code back then. So I would go to the bookstore, Barnes and Noble, every night and have to read how to program in. There's this database, Microsoft database called Access, and Visual Basic and all this stuff. So I'd read it, learn it. I go back to work the next day. I code as much as I could, and I get stuck. And then I have to go back to Barnes and Noble that night and figure out how to. I mean,
Well, you were also still living in the car.
yeah, exactly. And then I go, and then finally I ask, can you guys buy this book for me for $20 because it'll help me do this a lot faster. And they're like, yeah, whatever, $20, like, go ahead and expense it. And then I developed a prototype after a few weeks. And, the management team's jaw dropped. They said, I can't believe you developed this working prototype, Gene, in just a few weeks. You just went from plan B to plan A. You're going to, whatever you need, we're going to give you a designer. We're going to give you 2 developers. We're going to give you all this stuff, but you have to do it. You have to deliver it on time, and it has to be done by the end of the year, because they were contractually obligated to deliver this application to make this acquisition work, or this merger work. And so long story short, I worked the hardest that I ever worked in my life. So much so that there was a nurse there in the office, because it was long-term care insurance. And the nurse set up a little bed for me out of this couch with an alarm clock, because I was working literally around the clock. And so it was nice to actually have like somewhat of a makeshift bed, and I delivered it on time. I mean, I couldn't believe it myself. So talk about being uncomfortable doing something that you never had done before. I even lied through my teeth that I could do it for them when I had no idea whether I could or not, because I was so desperate. I mean, I was literally homeless at the time. And then I asked them for a job after that. And after that, they were like, Gene, of course, we want to hire you. So it's kind of a funny story. I went in and I asked for $40,000 to get paid $40,000 a year. And that was kind of like an okay salary for someone right out of school. And they're like, "Oh yeah, no problem." That's they almost said like it was nothing, you know. I went back home that night and I was so disappointed in myself for only asking for that much. So I went back and I said, actually, I want to ask for double that. And I gave them the argument for exactly why and justified it with, I've already saved you $500,000 and I'm confident that I can do that going forward and so forth. And they said, yeah, no problem. I went back and I was like, I should have asked for more, but I didn't ask for more after that. I mean, but you know, it's funny how that's how I got started. And soon after then I started in risk management after interviewing the entire leadership. Cause I started off in sourcing and I knew that's not what I wanted to do. So I interviewed all the leaders in the company to figure out what's the best career path and what would you recommend. And I landed on risk management and I've been doing it for over 25 years now.
From that really cool story, um, what principles did you take out of that period of your life that you said it was the worst period of your life, but you tell it with a grin on your face and a smile. So um, I think it's also one of the most valuable periods of your life, if I may, of course. So what principles or values did you took out of that period that you're grateful for now that you learned them?
Yeah, I think number one is believing in yourself. So, you know, if you're giving it your all in a company and there's this utter lack of disrespect or no value in what you're doing, then you're probably in the wrong place. Um, and also, you know, I could have taken the easy route and become a pizza delivery boy, and made a few dollars here and there just to be up and running. But, you know, I think I knew that I was capable of more than that. And I didn't want to settle for that. That meant prolonging my time being homeless and, you know, having or facing all these challenges. But I think in the end, I would have never carved out that path that I ultimately did had I taken that job. So number one, I think, is believing in yourself. Number two is, you know, I think there's something to be said about hard work. Um, and you know, I look at you, Joe, and you know, you've told me your story and how hard you work to get where you are. And I really admire and respect that. Um, and it almost takes one to know one, right? Like, you know, we're cut from the same cloth. And, you know, I think I see those two values in you as well in terms of knowing yourself, because you've taken risks of not taking the conventional path and building your own practice and freelancing and you've put in a lot of hard work to get there and you're still doing 150%, right? And so I think those two things together are some of the principles I took away from it.
Almost gives me chills if you say it because I'm really bad at receiving compliments. So that is like, ah, fuck it. Thanks.
But it's
I,
true.
yeah, I really
It's actually
appreciate
true.
it. And I do agree though that because of course you know my story, and if people are interested, just maybe some other time. But again, through those hard works and like we've been through the same kind of crap when it comes to being in a shitty place, being in a shitty period, working your ass off. It's also the thing that sets the foundation of liking to work hard and liking to strive for achievement and becoming good at what you're doing.
Hmm.
Because, and that's what I get back from my clients as well. Like when I talk about marketing, when I talk about consulting, when I talk about persuading people, when I talk about sales, I'm obsessive about it. I love it. And that's what you have when you talk about what you do and finding the right solutions. But creating that obsession can only be created through hard work and through putting in the hours. Because at the end, when you put in all the hours, you got eventually a job for 80K a year, and you probably could have asked for 1.5, but that's fine. You ended up at Revolut at one point, one of the most intense startups in fintech you can win. What strings did you pull to get there? How did you get into that world?
Well, I think it was a culmination of all the hard work and experiences that I had prior to Revolut that allowed me to, um, to be honored with the opportunity to work there as their U.S. Chief Risk Officer. Um, so, I think one of the things we talked about on our run is, because you're right, this has to come from within the hard work, but also believing in yourself and finding something that you're very passionate about. It takes some introspection and really knowing. It's like what Socrates said, right? Know thyself, really knowing yourself in order to be able to find that. But one of the things I mentioned to you on the run is, by investing in yourself and investing in your profession or your skill or whatever it may be, that's something that no one can take from you. You know, people can take money from you. They can take all these superficial things for you, but your investment in yourself is something that you can keep throughout those hardships, and to make more money or to rebuild. So, I think it's really important, and I think it's also ultimately what led me to get to Revolut was all the hard work and passion for the industry, for the discipline that came before, allowed me to have the opportunity to work there.
Then I'm also curious, because where did it come from? Where did your need for achievement and hard work and wanting to succeed and not accept being a pizza delivery boy, where did that come from?
That's a really good question, and something I think a lot about, because I have 3 young kids, and I'm trying to foster those same values or ideals within them. But I think a large part of it has to do with my childhood friends. 2 weeks ago, I went to New York City to meet with them. We've been friends for many decades, for practically all our life, and we're entering our 50s now. And we're very passionate about all kinds of things and very competitive with one another, whether it be video games or math competitions or what have you. We actually entered into this program in Alaska in our school called Quest, and it was a program for the gifted. So you actually had to take an IQ test and meet exceed the threshold or the hurdle. And so we even got even more close because we were in that class and we were learning so much, everything from Latin to scientific method to mathematics, even programming computers. And this was back in the early 80s, computers were just coming out back then. Um, and I think that really instilled something in me. And I don't know if it was the camaraderie, the competition, or just the fact that we fed off of each other's own curiosity and passion. But I think that really set a foundation in me. That's something that I've kept close to me ever since.
So the need for achievement came from some sort of brotherhood, some sort of camaraderie in that way. And to make a dark analogy out of that, that's the same thing Nazi Germany used to make their forces as strong as they were. They created brotherhood. It's the same method the Navy SEALs use to create brotherhood and camaraderie between the Navy SEALs to make them fight for each other. So do you think it's having that brotherhood and the camaraderie with your friend from New York also reinforce you to work harder and reinforce you to be there or show up maybe for your friend. Is that
I
something?
Yeah, I think so. But I think the difference between the military or Nazi Germany in particular is that there's this concept. Well, with Nazis in particular, my understanding is that there's this concept of white supremacy, right? And that's not really what fed my closeness to my friends. Um, I think we were all we were individuals, but also we found these areas where we just had common interests and common passions. Um, and I think that's also different with the military as well, right? Because it's like formation for a specific objective. And that's not why, I mean, my friends and I didn't have like some kind of hidden agenda or a specific objective for.
This is how we're gonna take over the world.
Yeah.
12 years old.
No, we were just, it was more social. We like each other's company. We were friends, and we also like challenging each other and seeing each other grow. So
It was just like a wild thought stream that popped in. So I just
no,
I threw it in there. But it's interesting because then at some point you worked really hard. You got the position in Revolut. You worked really hard in Revolut as well. You earned your strikes. And I say it in a bit of a different way because we had a conversation during your run that we both have the feeling, no matter how hard you work, that we always still need to show up and earn our strikes. So there's like something behind that. Let's not dive into that right now, but what was for you the tipping point when you realized, okay, something needs to change after all the hard work that you did, after all the things that you've done to get to the point where you were? What was the tipping point?
Yeah, I think there was a few things. I think after I left Revolut, it was a very challenging place to work from I mean, primarily in a good way. The company has grown, like you said, it's one of the fastest growing fintechs and has been since its inception. And you don't grow like that without people working really hard in the same direction and doing innovative things, right? So the bar is constantly being raised, and I think in some ways, I really like that environment because I'm always wanting to learn. I'm always wanting to self improve, and if the bar is always being raised, then you're kind of you want to do that, but you're kind of forced to do that. So I think that was a great thing. And also it allowed me to be in the place where I am today. When people see Revolut on my resume, there's something behind that. You have kind of earned your stripes to a degree, but I don't want to be complacent about that. I don't want to rest on my laurels to the point that you made. And so with my clients, with whatever I do, I like to continue to learn and grow. And I also think I'm entering in this stage of my life, entering into my 50s, where I read this book called Strength to Strength. It's an excellent read. One of the things it talks about is for people like you and me with this mentality where we always want to self-improve and become the best at what we do and just keep on getting better and better, you eventually age catches up with you, and it's just biology, right? Like there's nothing you can do about it. And I think this book provides examples of these extremely successful people that were the best at their game, and they try to maintain it until they die. And there's very few people that can do that. I mean, I watched this documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, I think it's called. I don't know if you've heard of it. Oh, you haven't checked it out? I highly recommend it. It's this guy who started making sushi in his teenage years, and he's like 90, he must be close to 100 years old, and he has one of the top sushi restaurants in Japan. And every single day, he's trying to perfect his craft. That is very unique. Probably 99.99% of the world can't go there. But the book provided examples of these extremely successful people that ultimately hit their wall, and the next generation supersede them, and they're devastated and they don't know what to do. Their entire world is flipped upside down, and they just go downhill into this psychological um, wormhole, and they get lost. And the fact of the matter is, they're still very sharp. They're very experienced. And the book talks about this change in terms of dynamics, in terms of your mental capability. In your younger years, you're the most innovative that you'll ever be. You come up with these bright ideas. You're agile, flexible. You can learn so much so very quickly. In your older years, actually, there's parts of the brain that help you teach people to transfer some of that wisdom. And so I made a conscious decision to start volunteering and giving back to the industry. So, as an example, I'm an advisor in one of the biggest incubators in the US at UC Berkeley called Skydeck. And I volunteer to a couple companies every 4 to 6 months. I'm doing that right now. I also become a mentor at the Fintech house here in Lisbon. And I haven't had too many talks there, but I try to give back there as well. And I think it's one of those things where you can provide a lot of value. You can give back, which feels good. I do it on a volunteer basis, and it's using different parts of your brain as you get older that you can still exercise, and you can, and you still have a very strong facility for. Not to say that you can't still learn at a quick pace and so forth, but it's just inevitable, right? That you're not going to be able to compete against the next generation forever.
So your tipping point was the realization of, wait, the next generation is coming. Why not cut the tie now, cut the ropes right now, and shift into a place of giving back, and picking off the fruits of my labor, of your labor in this case, from the past years that you still have the experience, are really competent, but actively choose to give back, go a bit more for enjoyment, go a bit more for grounded, while still improving, while still learning, but letting go of that fast-paced because of the age that was approaching.
Actually, no,
Okay.
apologies, Joe. I kind of sidetracked there and went on a different spiel. That's something what I just explained was kind of strength to strength is something I found later down the road. My main motivations to move away from a very high intensity environment like Revolut was two or threefold. Number one is I didn't really spend as much time as I would have liked with my family. And that's time I can never get back. Right. And, I always think about this over and over again. Was it really worth the trade-off? And when I look at my lifestyle now, where I can spend more time with my family, and we're able to live here in Portugal, and we've, I feel like we're in a better environment than where we were before. Sometimes I think it was worth that sacrifice in the beginning to be where we are today. But at the same time, I wish I could take back some of that time as well, because the time with the kids go by so quickly, and it's not time that you can never get back. I think the second thing was after Revolut, because it was so high intensity, I really did have some mental strain from that. It's something where I didn't see a therapist or anything like that, but I realized that my head wasn't quite right, because I really pushed myself too hard. And so it took me a good 4 to 6 months to get my head screwed on right, and really investing a lot of time in self-care and mental care to get my head in the right spot and be more healthy.
So the tipping point was more of realizing that you did not spend as much time with your family as you want, and by that you made decision that it's better to come to an end. And after that, so the first couple of days maybe after it all was done, the mental whiplash came from, whoa, maybe I'm not as stable as I thought mentally. So how were those first couple of days? Like, what did you do? What did you experience? And of course, like, what did you do to get your head back screwed on?
Yeah, I mean, it was like simple things that I observed, like my memory was a little bit weird that my attention span, my yeah, I think there is a such thing as workaholism and kind of getting into withdrawal a bit in terms of here I just came through this and I should be relaxing, but my mind's like already wanting to go on to the next thing. And so the way I slowed myself down was meditation was a really important part of it. Getting back into an exercise, more disciplined exercise routine was really helpful. And I think spending more time with family as well.
And in that way, you slowly recovered. Well, a couple of months, it's still quite fast actually to recover, but slowly recovered sounds more dramatic. So then you recovered, then you started freelancing, you started your own consulting firm. How did you told me on the run that happened quite organically, right? That at some point you said, okay, maybe I should start having some clients, and then they reached out to you because of the titles that you already had, because of the things, the achievements that you already have in your LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, exactly. I started to get the word out there that I was looking for something new. And one of my friends, Kirsten, actually introduced me to a bank. And she was already consulting, and I don't recall exactly why, but it was something that she couldn't take on. So she gave it to me, and I'm still consulting with this bank. They've been a great client, and I really enjoy working with them. But that was my first, dipping my toe in the water and experimenting with that. And it just was so natural and it went so well. And I really enjoyed the work. I really enjoyed the client that I kept on looking to expand the work from there.
And how do you, because the clients came quite naturally, that's what we talked about, and that's because of the recognized status that is fine on your LinkedIn profile. And I think within this conversation that we have, it's by default, like, it's clear that you have expertise, it's clear that you are competent in what you're doing. How do you price something like that? How do you work within your pricing if someone approaches you, if you get on a project? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's two ways that I look at pricing. Many of my clients are startups. And so if it's an advisory role and they're early stage and, cash is really king for them, it's really valuable, and they're looking to husband that money, then sometimes they'll give a slug of equity as compensation to me, and they won't pay me in cash. And I'll spend maybe an hour a month with them and helping them with their latest problems or thinking about the future. And then there's other clients that are much more intensive. They actually need me to play like a fractional role as a chief compliance officer or an annual officer or risk officer. So I'm actually embedded in their operations. And so the level of work is much more. For that, it's usually cash compensation. And the way I think about that is because of my experience, I can get things done a lot faster, a lot more proficient than the average person that they would hire. And that's not saying much about me. I mean, I've been in the industry for 25 years. You put anyone, in a given area for 25 years, and they're going to be able to do something similar, right? Compared to someone with only 5 years of experience or even 10 years of experience.
And then also in comparison, not just 25 years, no, 25 intensely hardworking, obsessive about work years.
Exactly.
That's also because you can be in a job for 25 years and don't learn shit, or by default learn something. Or you can be in a high paced environment and actually get things done. So then through the value that you provide, maybe it's equity, depending on if they have the cash or not. And on the intensity of the work, it's either cash compensation, equity or compensation, or a combination of both.
Exactly. And with the cash compensation, on an hourly, because I work on an hourly basis, it's, more than what they would pay on someone on a full-time basis. But because I can do it so quickly, on an absolute basis, they end up paying me less than had they hired, someone else. So I think in the end, it's more economical for them. They get to hire someone with 25 plus years experience that is an expert in their field. So they have the confidence to know that what I'm building for them is battle tested, and they'll pass exams and so forth with the regulators.
And how do you filter who to say yes to and who to say no to? Because I think you also sometimes get people who are starting up or who need you, but you're just like, no, it's not gonna happen.
I think my first filter is, can I add value to the client? And so if they're asking for something that where I either don't have the expertise or, well, yeah, I think it's plainly that I don't have the expertise, then the answer is no. My second filter is, how well do I work with this person? And so I think for most of my clients, I just have there's instant chemistry there. And I think that's why I've kept so many clients for so long, is because we really enjoy working with one another. But if that chemistry isn't there, then it's a no. Um, and that's no one's fault. It's just a matter of,
It's
who,
there
who we are.
or it's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the third thing is the soundness of the business. So I don't want to spend my time building something that's not actually going to come to fruition, right? And so that's a sanity check that I make myself. Like, does this business have legs? Does the business model make sense? Because I I don't want to make money just to make money off of someone. I want to build something with that person that's gonna last.
And and looking back, like, what's the thing that you wished you could have told yourself before going solo, before like everything within the life that you live right now, bit more peace, bit more at ease, bit more at your own pace, bit more chill in a way? What's something that you would have loved to hear, or something that you would have loved to tell the guy who lived in the car for 6 months?
I wish I would have done it sooner. I think in some ways living in the back of my truck made me fairly risk averse throughout my career. And, I think this was one of the first times that I actually did step out and take a few risks. And, with a family, it's a bigger risk to take. But I always knew that I could go back to a full-time job and work in corporate if I wanted to. But I wish I had done it sooner.
So what does success mean to you right now?
I think
How does your definition of success changed? It's maybe more interesting now. What does it mean right now? It's like, how does it changed?
it's still evolving. But I think, it's trying to find ways to support my kids, to spend time, quality time with my wife and with my kids. It's spending quality time with my friends as well. Thus the trip to New York to see them. Um, it's also investing in myself, and nowadays that looks a little bit different. I mean, I still love learning. I still love working, but it's also exercising, taking care of my health, and so forth. Hopefully, I'll I'll see some grandkids down the. I mean, way down way down the road. Um, but being healthy to be able to support my kids and taking care of them and spending time with them. So yeah, that to me is success, and it's ever evolving. I think, um, it'll change year after year.
And what if there is someone who is listening to your story, who listened to all of this right now, and is in that hardworking job, is in the 9 to 5 hustle, or however you want to call it, what is the one thing that you would love to say to that person who is doing all the work right now, who is there, who knows he or she is ambitious, and who knows they want to cut the rope at some point, but they're just filled with anxiety, filled with stress, filled with whatever it is that they're feeling, and don't dare to make that decision? What is it that you would say to that person?
That's a really good question. I would say number one, are you learning? Are you growing? And even if you have a really tough boss that's hard on you, you can turn those into learning opportunities, right? You can learn how to. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're always going to deal with very difficult people, and so the more skills, soft skills that we learn to manage those difficult people and turn those into successes, the better. So I even take those as learning moments, right? But I think as soon as you get comfortable, as soon as you're not learning more, that should be the driver for change. I think the other thing is, going back to your question, Job, of what does success look like? Is what you're doing, or are you realizing success in what you're doing? And that might be a really stressful, intense environment like Revolut, right? Like I was learning a ton because there's a product launching or a feature launching every week that I have to evaluate from a risk and compliance perspective. And it was very, very intense. But ultimately, my definition of success changed. It wasn't just about me learning something or being, top of my game in one of the fastest growing fintechs. It was also about having a little bit more balance, being able to spend time with my family as well as support my family. So keeping your eyes on the ball and making sure that you're honing in on that, whatever that definition of success is, and not holding on to the past definition of success.
I think that's a beautiful thing. And if people want to find you, if people want to come in contact to you, what should I put in the description?
Um, what
Like your LinkedIn or anything? Like, should I put anything of you in description for people who want to come in contact with you?
LinkedIn is great.
LinkedIn is great. Cool. And if there's one last thing that you would have said that you want to say to the listener, to the viewer right now, what would be that last thing that you would want to say to them?
I think every one of us is special, and it really goes back to knowing yourself and who you are, and really believing in yourself, right? I think for both of us, Job, and what we've been through, if we deviated from that, or if we lost who we were, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And so I think it's absolutely critical um, to be introspective, to look at yourself, and that there's many different practices that you can take on to do that: meditation or journaling, or even going out for a run like what we did a few weeks ago. So I encourage you all to do something like that.
And I want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for doing this. This was fun.
And it really was. It was a really nice conversation, actually. And like, subscribe, all that crap. And till next one. Ciao.
Ciao.